Ladies and gentlemen, today we bring you the highlights from President Donald Trump's powerful address at the United Nations General Assembly, a speech that echoed with the clear message of America First. Speaking before world leaders, the president delivered a firm reminder that the United States will always put its sovereignty and security above all else, even while engaging with the international community. America First diplomacy has become one of the defining pillars of U.S. foreign policy in recent years, reshaping the way Washington engages with allies, competitors, and global institutions. At its core, America First is not about isolationism, but about rebalancing priorities to ensure that the interests of the American people remain at the center of every diplomatic decision. When President Trump addressed the United Nations General Assembly, his speech carried this theme with unmistakable clarity. He reminded the world that the United States is a sovereign nation with its own values, responsibilities, and people to protect, and that no foreign agenda can be allowed to override those principles. For decades, American leaders often spoke in broad, global terms, committing U.S. resources, troops, and finances to causes that sometimes had little direct benefit for American families. America First seeks to reverse that trend by demanding fairness, reciprocity, and accountability from the international community. In practice, America First diplomacy has meant confronting long-standing trade imbalances, pressing allies in organizations such as NATO to carry their fair share of the defense burden, and re-evaluating foreign aid commitments to ensure that taxpayer dollars are spent wisely. Trump's speech at the UN reflected this recalibration. He argued that nations cannot expect the United States to subsidize their defense or economic growth while neglecting its own workers, farmers, and communities. His message resonated with many Americans who have felt that globalization and international agreements often benefited elites and foreign partners at their expense. By pledging to renegotiate deals and put American workers at the forefront of his policies, Trump sought to connect foreign policy decisions directly to kitchen table concerns back home. Critics of America First diplomacy often describe it as unilateral or inward-looking, but supporters argue that it is grounded in common sense. Every nation, Trump noted in his UN address, has the right to pursue policies that reflect its own culture, security, and prosperity. Sovereignty, he said, is not a barrier to cooperation but a foundation for it. Without respecting the sovereignty of each nation, global institutions risk losing legitimacy. For the United States, this meant no longer bowing to pressure from international organizations that failed to act in America's best interest. Whether it was the withdrawal from agreements that were deemed unfair, or a tougher stance toward regimes that violated international law, the White House portrayed these moves as defending American strength, not abandoning global responsibility. Another central element of America First diplomacy is deterrence. Trump emphasized that peace is best preserved through strength, and that America will never hesitate to defend its people. This approach has influenced U.S. relations with adversaries who test boundaries, whether in the form of missile threats, cyber attacks, or hostile rhetoric. By linking diplomacy to military readiness, the administration sought to project confidence that America would not be intimidated or sidelined in global affairs. Yet the president also made clear that America is not seeking endless conflict. Instead, the goal is to engage in negotiations from a position of power, securing outcomes that are fair and sustainable rather than lopsided. The impact of this doctrine can be seen in shifting international dynamics. Allies have been pressed to contribute more to joint defense. Trade partners have been pushed into renegotiations designed to balance deficits. And adversaries have faced tougher sanctions and diplomatic pressure. While controversial, these steps reflected the administration's belief that the old system had allowed others to take advantage of America's generosity. America First diplomacy, therefore, was framed not as a retreat, but as a recalibration, a way of saying that the United States will continue to lead, but no longer at the expense of its own people. Ultimately, America First diplomacy is about asserting that American leadership should flow from strength at home. By prioritizing economic growth, job creation, secure borders, and military readiness, the administration aimed to project stability abroad. In the UN speech, Trump's words captured this philosophy. A strong, prosperous, and confident America is better equipped to work with allies, confront adversaries, and shape the future of the international order. The message to the world was unmistakable. The era of America being taken for granted is over, and a new era of fair, reciprocal, and sovereign-based diplomacy has begun. National security and defense have always stood at the center of America's role in the world, but in recent years the emphasis has become sharper, more urgent, and more directly tied to the idea of protecting the homeland first. In his speech at the United Nations General Assembly, President Trump made it clear that the safety of the American people would never be compromised for the sake of global approval or diplomatic gestures. His words underscored a philosophy rooted in strength, that peace is preserved not by appeasement or endless concessions, but by unwavering readiness and the willingness to defend national interests at any cost. For many in the United States, this was a reaffirmation of a principle they long believed, that government's first duty is to safeguard its citizens, and any foreign policy that fails to do so is a betrayal of that duty. Trump's remarks carried a warning tone directed at hostile regimes, terrorist organizations, and actors who would test American resolve. He cited the dangers posed by nations pursuing weapons of mass destruction, the risks of rogue governments destabilizing entire regions, and the persistent threat of terrorism. Each of these challenges, he argued, demanded not only vigilance but decisive action. America would not stand idle while adversaries built capabilities that could harm its people or its allies. The United States, he insisted, retains both the military strength and the political will to respond swiftly and effectively. This reminder was not only for the international audience but also for Americans at home who expect their leaders to act firmly in moments of crisis. The doctrine of peace through strength was woven throughout his address. Trump argued that a strong America is a safe America, and by extension, a safer world. This philosophy connects economic prosperity, military readiness, and diplomatic credibility as inseparable elements of national defense. When America's economy is booming, it can better fund its military, maintain technological superiority, and deter adversaries. When its military is modernized and prepared, diplomacy carries greater weight because rivals understand that American words are backed by force if necessary. It is a strategy that insists deterrence is not aggressive but protective, designed to avoid conflict by convincing enemies that conflict is unwinnable. One of the recurring points in the America First approach to defense is the expectation that allies contribute fairly to collective security. Trump emphasized this in his UN remarks, pointing to long-standing partnerships where America has shouldered the majority of costs. Whether in NATO or in other security alliances, he argued that American taxpayers cannot be expected to endlessly subsidize nations that do not meet their commitments. The fairness principle, he said, applies as much to defense as it does to trade. By pressing allies to invest in their own militaries, the administration hoped to create a stronger collective shield while easing the financial strain on U.S. resources. This message resonated with many Americans who feel that while the U.S. has defended the world for decades, the world has not always stepped up to return the favor. The focus on national security also included non-traditional threats. Cybersecurity, border integrity, and the fight against transnational crime were all framed as essential components of defense in the modern era. Trump highlighted the dangers of unchecked migration, drug trafficking, and technological espionage, arguing that these are not distant problems but direct threats to American communities. In this broader view, defense is no longer limited to traditional battlefields but extends to digital networks, border crossings, and even economic systems that can be undermined by hostile actors. Critics of this approach often accuse the administration of being too confrontational, suggesting that such rhetoric could inflame tensions. Yet Trump's defenders argued the opposite, that clarity and strength prevent miscalculations by adversaries. Ambiguity, they said, invites risk, while clear red lines backed by military readiness reduce the chances of conflict. This belief in deterrence through decisive communication has long been a hallmark of U.S. strategy, but under America First, it took on a more explicit, unapologetic tone. In sum, national security and defense under America First are framed as inseparable from sovereignty and survival. Trump's UN speech reinforced the idea that America's role on the world stage is not to act as the world's policeman without regard for its own people, but to ensure that every action abroad directly contributes to the safety of the United States. It is a vision of defense that rejects complacency, demands accountability, and rests on the conviction that America's strength is the ultimate guarantor of peace. To Americans listening back home, the message was unmistakable: their safety comes first, and the government will use every tool, diplomatic, economic, and military, to make sure that promise is kept. National security and defense remain the bedrock of America's promise to its people, a promise that no matter how turbulent the world becomes, the United States will always stand prepared to protect its citizens and its way of life. When President Trump spoke about this subject in his United Nations General Assembly address, he laid out a vision that tied America's strength abroad directly to the safety and confidence of families at home. His words were firm, reminding the world that the United States would not hesitate to act when its security was threatened. For Americans listening back home, this was not just rhetoric, it was a clear assurance that their government would prioritize their safety above all else. The president drew attention to the dangers that continue to test global stability, from rogue states seeking nuclear weapons to terror networks determined to spread chaos. He argued that the international community has too often responded with hesitation or half measures, while America has carried much of the burden for confronting these threats. Under an America First approach, the goal is not to retreat but to ensure that the costs of global security are shared, and that American strength is used strategically rather than squandered. Trump insisted that peace is best maintained through power, and that adversaries must never mistake American openness for weakness. The idea is simple: only when the United States is strong can it negotiate effectively and deter aggression. The speech also placed a spotlight on military readiness, modernization, and investment. America's armed forces, Trump noted, represent not only the most advanced fighting force in the world but also the ultimate guarantor of freedom. He reminded the assembly that the U.S. would never allow its capabilities to decline to the point where adversaries might be tempted to test its resolve. In this sense, defense spending was presented not as a burden, but as a necessity that secures both national survival and international stability. A well-funded, well-equipped military is a signal to the world that America is serious about protecting its borders, its allies, and its values. Trump's remarks also underscored the expectation that allies step up to strengthen their own defenses. The president pointed out that in alliances such as NATO, American taxpayers have shouldered a disproportionate share of the costs. He argued that fairness must apply in defense as much as in trade. While the United States remains committed to its friends, it is unsustainable, he said, for one nation to do so much while others contribute so little. This demand for greater burden sharing has been a recurring theme of his foreign policy, and at the UN, he tied it directly to the principle of sovereignty: each nation must take responsibility for its own security while cooperating with others. National security in the modern age also goes beyond traditional battlefield concerns. Trump spoke about cyber threats, border integrity, and transnational crime, emphasizing that enemies no longer only attack with missiles or bombs but through digital networks, illegal trafficking, and economic manipulation. These non-traditional threats pose challenges that require new strategies and new tools. Protecting American infrastructure, industries, and information systems is as critical as protecting its airspace or coastlines. By broadening the definition of defense, the president sought to show that security is a comprehensive mission that touches every aspect of national life. Critics often warn that this emphasis on power risks escalating tensions with adversaries. Yet supporters counter that ambiguity and weakness invite greater danger, while clarity backed by strength ensures stability. Trump's rhetoric at the UN reflected that belief. By stating America's red lines openly and reminding adversaries of its unmatched capabilities, he sought to deter miscalculations that could lead to conflict. His message was that America does not seek war but will never shy away from defending itself if forced. Ultimately, the theme of national security and defense in the America First framework is not about withdrawing from the world but about prioritizing American safety above all. It is about ensuring that every policy, whether military, diplomatic, or economic, connects back to the fundamental obligation of government, to protect its people. In his UN address, Trump's words carried the weight of that promise, delivered in a way that resonated both within the halls of the United Nations and in households across the United States. The pledge was unmistakable: America will remain strong, vigilant, and unyielding in its defense, and its people will always come first. Economic prosperity has always been a cornerstone of American strength, and in his United Nations General Assembly address, President Trump made clear that the America First agenda begins with ensuring that the U.S. economy remains the most dynamic, resilient, and competitive in the world. He linked economic growth directly to national security, foreign policy, and the everyday lives of American families. The message was straightforward: when America prospers, its people are empowered, its military is strengthened, and its leadership in the world becomes unshakable. Without prosperity at home, no nation can hope to sustain influence abroad, and for Trump, this was the central truth that guided his approach. He pointed to the revival of U.S. industries as proof that America First policies were delivering results. Manufacturing jobs that had long been written off as lost to globalization began to return, while energy production surged to levels that made the United States not only independent but a leading exporter. These shifts, Trump argued, were not accidental but the direct result of policies designed to put American workers and businesses first. Lowering taxes, cutting regulations, and renegotiating trade deals were presented as practical steps that restored opportunity and ensured that America remained the best place in the world to invest and build. For families in towns and cities across the country, the benefits meant more than statistics, they meant paychecks, stability, and the promise of a better future. Trade was a major theme in Trump's remarks, reflecting one of the most visible aspects of the America First approach. He criticized past agreements that left the United States with massive deficits and industries weakened by unfair practices. At the UN, he delivered a sharp reminder that America would no longer tolerate imbalances that hurt its workers while propping up competitors. Renegotiating trade deals, imposing tariffs when necessary, and holding partners accountable were all part of his strategy to level the playing field. This was not, he insisted, about rejecting globalization but about demanding fairness. In his view, free trade without fairness is simply exploitation, and America would not accept being taken advantage of any longer. The president also connected economic prosperity to innovation and competitiveness. By prioritizing American talent, research, and entrepreneurship, he argued that the United States could remain the leader in technology and industry. He emphasized that the future of economic growth depended on harnessing the ingenuity of the American people, whether in energy, medicine, or digital innovation. These strengths, he said, should not be outsourced or undermined by global agreements that restrict U.S. potential. Instead, they should be protected and expanded, ensuring that American workers lead the next generation of breakthroughs. Energy independence was another critical piece of the prosperity puzzle. Trump highlighted how the United States, through new technologies and investments, had become a dominant force in global energy markets. This independence was framed not only as an economic advantage but also as a national security asset, freeing America from reliance on unstable regions. By producing and exporting energy, the U.S. could support its allies, strengthen its economy, and maintain greater control over its destiny. For Trump, energy prosperity meant jobs at home, leverage abroad, and stability across industries that depend on affordable and reliable resources. The America First approach to prosperity also extended to infrastructure and domestic investment. Trump emphasized that America's roads, bridges, airports, and digital networks must be second to none if the country is to remain globally competitive. By channeling resources into rebuilding the nation's foundation, the administration sought to create jobs, stimulate growth, and ensure that America was prepared for the challenges of the 21st century. Prosperity, he argued, is not just about short-term gains but about creating conditions that sustain success for future generations. Critics of the America First economic vision often warned that the focus on tariffs and trade disputes could spark tensions with allies or disrupt global supply chains. Yet supporters countered that the alternative, accepting unfair deals and allowing industries to erode, was far more dangerous. At the UN, Trump's words reflected the confidence that America's economic resurgence was proof that the strategy was working. By demanding respect in trade and investing in its own people, the United States was building a foundation that not only benefited its citizens but also strengthened its role as a global leader. In the end, Trump's focus on economic prosperity was about more than numbers. It was about dignity, opportunity, and independence. He framed the economy as the life